The silence that held the grand hall of the prestigious conservatory was broken not by applause but by the muffled sound of tears falling onto the crimson velvet of the empty seats as Marina Delacroix played the final chord of a symphony that had remained unfinished for 20 years. 3 hours earlier, however, Marina was just another invisible cleaning lady pushing a cleaning cart through the labyrinthine corridors of the prestigious institution. Her calloused hands held the cleaning cloth with the same delicacy with which they once caressed the ivory keys, but no one there knew this. To the music students rushing past with their gleaming instruments, she was a nameless shadow, a presence that moved silently between the rehearsal rooms, collecting the vestiges of dreams in progress. The morning had begun with particular cruelty when Marina found Professor August Meridian yelling at one of his students in the Mozart room. Young Sophia trembled before the grand piano, her fingers paralyzed on the keys as the professor's venomous words pierced her confidence like shards of glass. "You have no talent, girl. Your parents are wasting their money sending you here. A melody played with such coldness will never touch a single heart." Meridiani's voice echoed through the acoustically perfect walls of the room, each syllable calculated to humiliate. "Perhaps you should consider something more suitable to your limitations." Marina stopped cleaning the hallway mirror, her shoulders tense. She knew well that pain spreading across Sophia's face like spilled ink on blank paper. 20 years earlier, she herself had been in the same position, receiving similar words from the same man who was now destroying another young soul. Sophia left the room with red eyes, stumbling in her own sadness. She walked right past Marina without seeing her, as always happened. To her, the cleaning lady was part of the conservatory's furniture, as invisible as the air she breathed. Marina watched the girl disappear down the hall and felt a crack open in her chest, as if a dam long contained began to give way to the pressure. The Grand Hall Conservatory was a temple of classical music, its walls adorned with portraits of great composers and corridors that perpetually echoed with scales and arpeggios. Marina had worked there for 8 years, long enough to memorize every note that escaped from the rehearsal rooms, every dream that was born and died between those marble walls. She knew the students by their mistakes, their achievements, their tears of frustration, and their smiles of discovery. But no one knew Marina. No one knew that she had been one of the most promising pianists of her generation, accepted at 16 into the same conservatory where she now cleaned the bathrooms. No one knew that her hands had once danced across the keys with such mastery that critics compared her technique to Clara Schumann's, and above all, no one knew that it had been August Meridiani himself who had destroyed her career with a single cruel sentence, uttered during a masterclass in front of an audience of 200 people. The memory still haunted her in nightmares. Herself at 18, performing Rachmaninoff's Concerto No. 2, her favorite piece. The first movements had flowed like crystalline water, each note finding its place in the universe with mathematical perfection, but in the third movement, the pressure of the moment, the intensity of Meridiani's gaze, the weight of expectations, everything had conspired against her. Her fingers slipped, a dissonant chord tore through the melody like a razor. "Stop!" Meridiani's voice had cut through the air like an axe. "Miss Delacroix, what we have just witnessed was a perfect demonstration of how mediocrity can disguise itself as talent. Your hands may be fast, but your soul is empty. Music without soul is just organized noise." The silence that followed was more deafening than any symphony. Marina had risen from the piano bench with trembling legs, her eyes burning with humiliation. She ran from the room and never returned. She abandoned her studies, stored her dreams in a box at the back of a closet, and learned to live a small and safe life, far from the stages and the crowds. For years she convinced herself that she had made the right choice. She married a kind but unimaginative man, had a stable office job, built a predictable routine. But when her husband left her for a younger coworker and she lost her job due to budget cuts, Marina found herself forced to accept any opportunity that came her way. And so, fate brought her back to the place of her greatest humiliation. In her first days as a cleaner at the conservatory, every note that escaped from the rehearsal rooms was like salt on a still open wound. But gradually, something began to change. Marina discovered that there was a strange beauty in being invisible, in being able to watch music reborn through young hands and anxious hearts. She began to find peace in that silent routine, cleaning up the vestiges of others' dreams, until Sophia appeared. The girl had arrived at the conservatory 3 months earlier, shy and awkward, with a raw talent that reminded Marina of herself at 16. Meridiani had accepted Sophia as a private student, and since then Marina had watched the systematic destruction of the girl's confidence. Each lesson was a spectacle of psychological cruelty, with Meridiani methodically undermining any spark of self-esteem that Sophia possessed. Marina knew she should do something, but what? She was just a cleaning lady, a voiceless shadow. What authority did she have to intervene in the teacher-student dynamic? What right did she have to interfere in the life of a girl who didn't even know her name? The answer came the following afternoon, when she found Sophia crying alone in the Chopin room, a small rehearsal room that was rarely used. The girl was sitting before a slightly out-of-tune upright piano, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "He's right," Sophia murmured, oblivious to Marina's presence. "I have no talent. My parents are wasting their money. I should give up." Marina stopped in the doorway, torn between the urge to comfort Sophia and the fear of revealing herself. But when Sophia stood to leave, she stumbled, sending her sheet music scattering across the floor. The pages fluttered like wounded butterflies, and Marina couldn't help but approach to gather them. "Rachmaninoff," Marina said softly, recognizing the score. "Concerto number 2. Sophia looked at her in surprise. It was the first time the cleaning lady had spoken to her directly. "You know classical music?" Sophia asked, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Marina hesitated. For a moment, she considered lying, saying she'd only seen the name on the cover. But something in Sophia's vulnerability disarmed her completely. "A little," she admitted. "I studied music a long time ago. Professor Meridian says I'll never be able to play this piece. He says it's too complex for someone with my limitations." The word hung heavy with bitterness. What hung heavy with bitterness? Marina felt the old anger begin to boil in her veins. 20 years of silence, 20 years of swallowed humiliation, 20 years of stifled dreams. It all surfaced at once. May I hear you play?" Marina asked, her voice barely a whisper. Sophia looked at her incredulously. "You want to hear me play? If you don't mind." Sophia sat hesitantly at the piano. She began the first movement of the concerto, and Marina immediately recognized the problem. Sophia's technique was impeccable. Her fingers danced across the keys with mechanical precision, but something was missing, an emotional connection that transformed notes into music. It was exactly what Meridian had said about Marina 20 years earlier. The difference was that this time, Marina could see the solution. "Stop," she said softly, and Sophia immediately lifted her hands from the keyboard. "You're playing the notes, but you're not telling the story." "What story?" Marina approached the piano, her fingers trembling slightly. "This concerto, Rachmaninoff wrote it after a deep depression. Every note carries the weight of his struggle against the darkness, but also the hope of rebirth. You can't play it just with your fingers. You need to play it with your whole soul." "But how?" Marina looked at her own hands, calloused from manual labor, but still holding the memory of 1,000 melodies. Slowly, she sat beside Sophia on the piano bench. "May I show you?" Sophia nodded, fascinated. Marina placed her hands on the keys and closed her eyes. For a moment, time stood still. She was back at 18, back on the stage where her dreams had died. But this time, there was no Meridian watching with cruel eyes. There was only her, the piano, and the music that had lain dormant in her heart for 2 decades. The first chord emerged from the depths of her soul like a silenced cry. Marina began to play, and the room transformed. The out-of-tune piano suddenly gained an impressive richness of sound, each note vibrating with an emotion so pure that the air around seemed to glow. Her hands danced across the keys with a familiarity that defied the years of separation, each movement imbued with a grace that had only been dormant, never lost. Sophia watched, hypnotized, tears silently tracing paths down her cheeks. Something magical was happening in the small room, something that transcended the simple execution of a musical piece. It was as if Marina were channeling not only Rachmaninoff, but all the pain, all the hope, all the love that had been suppressed over the years. When Marina reached the passage where she had failed 20 years before, her fingers didn't hesitate. This time, there was no fear, no judgment, only the music flowing through her like a river finally reaching the sea. The chord that had once been her ruin now sounded like a declaration of freedom, an affirmation that true art knows no limits of age, social standing, or circumstance. The music echoed through the room and spread through the conservatory hallways like ripples on a still pond. Students stopped their practices to listen, professors opened their classroom doors, cleaning staff paused their chores. The sound from the out-of-tune piano in the Chopin room had transformed into something transcendent, something that touched hearts and awakened dormant memories. Marina played for 15 uninterrupted minutes, navigating complex movements with a seemingly supernatural ease. When she finally finished, the silence that followed was charged with a different energy. It wasn't the silence of expectation or judgment, but the silence of genuine admiration. "My God," Sophia whispered, her voice trembling with emotion, "You're incredible. How can you be working as a cleaning lady?" Marina finished, a wistful smile curving her lips. Sometimes life takes us down unexpected paths. At that moment, a shadow appeared in the doorway. August Meridian stood in the threshold, his face a mask of disbelief. He hadn't heard Rachmaninoff's Concerto No. 2 played with such mastery, such emotional depth, in years. The last time had been, "Marina," he said, his voice almost inaudible. "Marina Davies." Marina turned slowly to face him. 20 years dissolved between them, and suddenly she was again the young student who had fled humiliated from a master class. But this time, there was something different in her eyes. There was no longer the fear that had once paralyzed her. There was only a profound sadness and a dignity that years of suffering had forged. "Professor Meridian," she said calmly, "still destroying young talent, I see." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Meridian entered the room slowly, his face reflecting a complex mixture of emotions, surprise, guilt, admiration, and something that might have been shame. "You been here this whole time, working as a janitor?" "Yes." Marina rose from the piano with dignity. "Someone has to clean up the mess, don't they?" The irony wasn't lost. Sophia watched the interaction between the two adults with growing fascination, beginning to understand that there was a story here, layers of meaning she was only beginning to decipher. Meridian began, but she cut him off. "No," she said firmly. "This isn't about me right now. It's about Sophia. It's about all the Sophias who've passed through your hands over the years. It's about what you did to me, and what you're doing to her." Marina turned to Sophia, who watched her with wide eyes. "You have talent, Sophia, a rare and precious talent. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Don't make the same mistake I made." "What mistake?" Sophia asked. "I let one person's words define my worth. I let the fear of judgment stop me from doing what I love. I wasted 20 years of my life because I believed I wasn't good enough." Marina looked directly at Meridian. "But you know what I discovered today, that the music doesn't go away. It waits. It waits until we find the courage to let it flow again." Meridian remained silent, visibly shaken. For the first time in decades, he was being confronted with the real consequences of his pedagogical methods. The woman before him was no longer the frightened young girl who had fled his classroom. She was someone who had survived the storm he had created and emerged with a wisdom he himself didn't possess. "You can stay and watch," Marina continued, turning back to the piano, "but you're not going to interfere. Sophia, come, let's get to work." What happened in the next 2 hours was nothing short of magical. Marina worked with Sophia, not as a traditional teacher, but as a mentor, an older sister sharing precious secrets. She didn't destroy Sophia's confidence to rebuild it in her own way. Instead, she nurtured the spark that was already there, helping it grow until it became a bright flame. Music isn't about technical perfection, Marina explained as she guided Sophia's fingers across the keys. It's about communication. It's about taking an emotion that's trapped inside your chest and setting it free through the notes. Every person who hears your music should feel a piece of your soul. Sophia began to understand. Her hands relaxed, her posture softened, and gradually, the music coming from the piano began to take on a life of its own. It was no longer a mechanical execution of notes written on a score, but an intimate conversation between the pianist and her instrument. Meridian watched in silence, and something fundamental was shifting in his perception. He had spent decades believing that harshness, relentless criticism, and constant pressure were the only paths to excellence. But before him was proof that there was another way, a way of encouragement, understanding, and organic growth. "How did you learn this?" Sophia asked during a pause, looking at Marina with genuine admiration. "The hard way," Marina replied, "through loss, regret, and years of silence, but maybe it was necessary. Maybe I needed to go through all of that to truly understand what music means." "You know," said Marina, looking directly where you are right now, "there's something powerful in sharing moments of transformation like this. If this story is touching your heart, if you believe everyone deserves a second chance to chase their dreams, I encourage you to join our community. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, not just to keep up with more stories like this, but because you're a part of something bigger. Every subscription represents someone who believes in the power of redemption and the art of starting over. Together, we can create a space where overcoming stories are celebrated and where no one has to face their fears alone. During the rest of the afternoon, students and teachers began to gather discreetly in the hallways near the Chopin room. News that an extraordinary pianist was working with a student spread through the conservatory like wildfire. But no one dared interrupt what was clearly a sacred moment. As the sun began to set, painting the room's windows in golden hues, Marina decided it was time to take the next step. There was one last lesson Sophia needed to learn, one last barrier that needed to be broken. "Sophia," she said, "I want you to play the entire concerto, not just for me, but for everyone waiting outside." Sophia paled. "I can't. What if I make mistakes? What if they laugh?" Marina held the girl's trembling hands. "Then you make mistakes and keep playing. That's what real music means. Not the absence of imperfection, but the courage to be vulnerable in front of other human beings. Will you play with me?" Marina hesitated. The idea of exposing herself again, of risking the humiliation that had defined her life for so long, still terrified her. But looking at Sophia, seeing the reflection of her own lost youth in those hopeful eyes, she knew she had no choice. "Let's do it together," she said. "One piano, 4 hands, 2 souls. What do you say?" Sophia smiled for the first time in months, a smile that lit up the entire room. They walked out of the Chopin room side by side, Marina still wearing her janitor's uniform, Sophia clutching her sheet music to her chest like a protective shield. The hallway was packed with people, students sitting on the floor, teachers leaning against the walls, staff who had abandoned their duties to witness what promised to be a historic moment. At the end of the hallway, the double doors of the concert hall stood open. The Grand Hall Conservatory was empty at this time of day, its red velvet seats waiting in respectful silence. Someone, perhaps one of the older students, perhaps a professor, had turned on the stage lights, and the grand concert piano gleamed under the spotlights like a precious jewel. Marina stopped at the entrance to the hall, her breath catching in her throat. It was exactly as she remembered, exactly as it appeared in her nightmare. The same stage where her dreams had died 20 years ago stood before her again, as if time were circular, and she were destined to confront her demons in this hallowed place. "May I?" Sophia asked, extending her hand. Marina looked at the outstretched hand, young, calloused free, trembling slightly, with nervousness and expectation. It was a hand that had yet to know disillusionment, that still believed music could heal the world. It was a hand that needed to be protected, nurtured, encouraged. Marina took Sophia's hand, and together they walked onto the stage. The concert piano was magnificent, its ivory keys gleaming under the lights. Marina approached it as if it were an old friend she hadn't seen in decades. She ran her fingers gently over the closed lid, feeling the smooth, cool wood beneath her skin. "Ready?" she asked Sophia. "With you beside me, yes." They sat on the wide bench, Marina on the left, Sophia on the right. The audience that had naturally formed in the front rows waited in respectful silence. Meridian was in the first row, his face a mask of contradictory emotions. Marina placed her hands on the keys and closed her eyes. For a moment, she was back at 18, feeling the weight of expectations, the fear of failure, the suffocating pressure of others' judgment. But then she felt Sophia's warm presence beside her, remembered the girl's smile, the trust she had placed in her. "Now," she whispered. The first chord echoed through the hall like a gentle thunder, perfectly tuned and charged with emotion. But this time, Marina wasn't alone. Sophia's hands joined hers, creating a harmony neither could achieve alone. 4 hands, 10 fingers, 2 hearts beating in unison. The concerto flowed through them like water through a finally opened gate. Each note was an act of redemption, each phrase a declaration that it's never too late to begin again. Marina felt decades of pain and regret being transformed into pure beauty, while Sophia discovered what it truly meant to play with her soul. The audience was hypnotized. Many wept openly, touched by something that transcended mere musical performance. It was a healing ceremony, a ritual of rebirth, a powerful demonstration that true art knows no barriers of age, social class, or circumstance. As they reached the final movement, the emotional climax of the piece, Marina looked at Sophia and saw tears of joy streaming down the girl's face. They weren't tears of fear or frustration, but of pure happiness, of deep connection with something larger than herself. The final chord resonated through the concert hall like a prayer being answered. The silence that followed was absolute, sacred, filled with gratitude and admiration. Then, slowly, one person began to applaud, then another, and another. In a few seconds the entire hall was on its feet, applauding with an intensity that made the walls vibrate. But Marina barely heard the applause. She was looking at Sophia, who shone like a newborn star, finally understanding the power she held in her hands. "Thank you," Sophia whispered through her tears. "Thank you for showing me who I really am." Marina smiled, feeling a peace she hadn't experienced in decades. "Thank you for reminding me who I always was." Meridian approached the stage slowly, his pride battling against the recognition of what he had witnessed. When he spoke, his voice was laden with a humility his students had never heard before. "Marina," he said, I was wrong. About you, about Sophia, about everything. I would like you to consider returning as a teacher this time. Your methods are what this place truly needs." Marina looked at him for a long moment. 20 years of anger, resentment, buried dreams, it was all there, waiting to be expressed. But when she opened her mouth to speak, the words that came out surprised her. "I forgive you," she said simply, "not for what you did, but for myself."
because carrying that anger for so long hurt me more than it helped. She stood up from the piano and looked at the audience, then at Sophia, finally at her own hands that had just rediscovered their true calling. As for your offer, she continued, I accept, but with conditions. Sophia will be my first official student, and I want complete freedom to teach in my own way. No humiliation, no destruction of self-esteem, just music, growth, and the celebration of what makes each student unique. In the months that followed, the Grand Hall Conservatory underwent a subtle but profound transformation. The room that had been renamed Studio Delacroix was always filled with laughter, music, and the sound of young talents being nurtured instead of pruned. Marina had found not only her lost voice, but her true purpose. Sophia flourished under her guidance, becoming not only a technically proficient pianist, but a genuine artist who played with the same passion she had learned to feel on that transformative afternoon. She often told the other students that her teacher had taught her the most important lesson of all, that music doesn't live in sheet music, but in the hearts of those who have the courage to open them completely. And Marina, who had spent 20 years believing her best days were behind her, discovered that true mastery didn't come from youth or a lack of scars, but from the wisdom that can only be gained through loss and the subsequent choice to begin again. Her hair might be grayer now, her hands might bear the marks of time, but her music possessed a depth and humanity that no 16-year-old prodigy could hope to achieve. Every night, after the last lesson, Marina sat alone in the Delacroix studio and played for the empty room, not out of necessity or obligation, but pure joy. Each note was a celebration of the second chance life had given her, each melody a prayer of gratitude for the courage she had finally found to be herself. And sometimes, in the moments of silence between musical phrases, she could swear she heard the echo of other voices, voices of all those who, like her, had lost their way, but found the strength to start over. It was a symphony of redemption, played not on grand stages, but in the hearts of those who refused to give up on their dreams, no matter how lost they might seem. Music, after all, never dies. It simply waits for the right moment to be reborn.